You are listening to The Material Revolution, a podcast dedicated to building a better understanding of and relationship to textiles, fibers, and resources. I am your host, Catherine Susie, and I'm sitting down with artists, designers, educators, scientists, and creative thinkers from around the globe about their specialized knowledge and experience in working with fibers, processes, techniques, and technologies with the intention to create awareness, inspire knowledge, address responsible practices, encourage creativity, and to build a material community. So I welcome you to tune in and listen to those who are contributing towards change and a material revolution. Before we dive into today's interview and content, you can find us at www.thematerialrevolution.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Material Revolution. And to view some of our video interviews, hop on over to our YouTube channel. Hello and welcome to this episode of The Material Revolution. Today we're going to travel into a world that involves a plant, a resource known as Urtica dioica to some, but to the rest of us, we know it as nettle or stinging nettle. This plant can be pretty much found in all corners of the world and has a deep traditional use in places like Nepal and India, and was heavily utilized by ancient societies such as the Saxons. But I would also like to acknowledge the use of this plant has not only impacted a history related to textiles, it's also been utilized as a food source and as a medicine. Its ecology is actually quite fascinating, and I spoke to UK textile artist Allan Brown about his investigation and expertise of this resource and how it's come to shape not only the textiles that he creates, but also in how he questions humanity's relationship to nature. But it's his relationship with time and place that is integral to his research and practice, and it's through his use of traditional handcraft applications that he's been able to invoke the wisdom and creative possibilities that is inherent in this fiber and in this resource. We discuss his relationship to this resource and of his observation of the land as it relates to his solo journey as an artist, and how it's come to impact a global community of nettle activists who are collectively discovering, experimenting, and sharing their knowledge of this ubiquitous plant. However, I do want to take a quick moment before we transition into my conversation with Allan that during the recording of our conversation, we both had some connection issues that unfortunately we couldn't edit out of this episode. I would also like to address that at the time of the recording of my interview with Allan, him and his collaborator Dylan Howitt had established a Kickstarter campaign to support their project, a film, a documentary film that would showcase Allan's process and the making of a dress by hand using wild nettles. And I'm happy to report that they've been 100% successful in acquiring the funds through their campaign. I am looking forward to when this documentary is released, and you can be assured that I will make that information available on my social media channels and through my website. So I invite you now to settle in, get your favorite cup of tea, and give yourself the next hour to listen to how a passion for knowledge, informed by this fiber and resource, has allowed for the development of a deep and kindred relationship to the land and to processes that empower one's journey into another.
Hi, my name is Allan Brown. I'm calling from Brighton on the south coast of the UK, and I've got my fingers in a few pies. With a couple of pals, I run the Nettle for Textiles website and Facebook group, which is a group all about nettles. And then I also have my own thing called Hedgerow Couture, which is just all the stuff that I make outside of pure nettles, but using a lot of nettles. And I guess a broad category would be I'm a textile artist, although that would sound more grandiose than I actually feel. But
I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today, because I know that you have a new project, which we'll get into a little bit later into our discussion, that I want to be able to help promote and get the word out there. But I know there's a lot to sort of unpack in your knowledge and experience in working with nettle. And so I think it's really important to sort of address, like, for those that have no idea or new to the concept of nettle and listening to this podcast, but it is a material, it is a resource that, as far as to my knowledge, it dates back to the 16th century. It's been used for food as well as textiles and holistic medicines. And I know that there's a bit of a revival of it in industry as a sustainable solution. But in your case, Allan, what really resonates with me about with what you're doing, which is also something that's at the heart of my research and practice in working with textiles, is the importance of accessing it and producing at a local level. And also for us to sort of have this, knowledge around what is actually accessible to us as a resource. And in the case of nettle, it's something that is worldwide, and it's clear in the sort of the growing community that you've been influential in building in and around nettle resources and the possibilities of what can be done with this. I'm just curious, how were you introduced to working with nettle?
Well, I mean, it's one of those completely accidental, chance, unthought out sort of occurrences. I had no textile background at all before I got into nettles. The sort of areas that I'd been committing a lot of time to previous to that was local food production. In the UK, we have allotments which you can use to grow food on. So I've been doing that for years and years. So a lot of issues about sustainability and localism and food security was something that I've been looking at for quite a long time. But it was really when I was just out and about in the Sussex countryside with a foraging book and just working out what plants were, what foods were available and when, mainly because we had just got a family dog. I found myself out walking more than I usually had been. And yeah, I was fiddling with nettles as I was walking along one day. Just sort of, I remembered years ago on a permaculture course, I was shown how to make nettle cordage. So I was just trying to remember how to do that. And I was peeling off the fibers and fiddling around and making bits of cordage. And sort of as I was working with it, I noticed that within the bast, which I was using to, the skin of the nettle, is to make rough cordage with these really beautiful fine fibers, which, if you scrape your nail along the plant, they're really, really wonderful, fine, white, clean looking fibers. So it was just really idle curiosity that got totally out of hand and became a full-blown obsession. Could it be done? Had textiles been made from nettles? And if so, how were they made? And that just set me off, just exploring every avenue I could find. And along the way, I just sort of learned about flax production and like, wow, that's cool. And thought, right, I sort of borrowed ideas from wherever it came in, and also doing a lot of historical research into looking at, had nettles been used before, and when and how were they used? Loads and loads of questions, of which it was quite hard to actually find any definitive article, information about at the beginning. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I can see the information was always there, and there was lots of people experimenting with it. But I think what I find sort of most intriguing now is that there's a woman called Gillian who's a good friend now, and she wrote a book called From Sting to Spin, which was all about the history and cultural, mythological, fairy tale references to nettle being used for textiles. And it seemed that the nettle sort of did a number on her as well. She was setting out to research something completely different, and then for some reason just became fascinated about nettle. And when she set about doing her research, it was pre-internet. So it was, she went through archives and universities and, really dug deep. She can't really explain why it became such a driving obsession for her. And I keep noticing that there's something about I don't know, maybe it's just the sheer contrast of this readily, available weed essentially that grows everywhere and has this stick. It's one of the plants that everyone knows, and as a child you certainly know about it. Then it's turned into this yarn which is silky and soft and protective. So yeah, maybe it's just the contrast of the duality within the plant itself. But yeah, so that's really the origins of it. And actually trying to learn about weaving to see how to actually start making samples of little samples of the cloth, it just started to make me value and appreciate cloth in a completely different way. It was, I realized how much energy and time goes into processing it. And even though nettles are probably harder to work with, or it takes more time than other fibers, it's just this this relationship and just awe of cloth being made down through history, and quite what that would take and how precious it would be. And that suddenly started tying me back into the whole, localism in food growing, and looking at ideas of how just our relationship with textile in general, and how we could try and stop the juggernaut of crazy overconsumption and the environmental impact that textiles does have.
Couldn't agree with you more, because what motivated me to start doing this podcast was really to kind of have some deeper conversations around a lot of these misconceptions, misinformation around, fibers and resources, so that we have a better understanding, but to truly understand the valuable reason why they are made available to us, and for us to use them in a way that we aren't overusing them. But it is a complex field. It's something that people need to be made aware of. And as I mentioned earlier, the importance of what is actually available at the local level. I've always known that food and textiles, the relationship between the two is synonymous. And yet I realize, and I appreciate that you have your background in permaculture and food production, because it really does create sort of that added lens in relation to your sensitivity into, how we can perhaps motivate and drive the knowledge, and where perhaps the cultivation of the production of this fiber can go, not just in the present, but into the future as a regenerative resource. I think for the audience listening to this, if you could visually describe it, how would you best describe nettle?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is just such a striking plant, and as you said earlier, it's a huge family, and most nettle exists in some form or other just about every corner of the earth, and it's very distinctive. And from a foraging food point of view, it's just this resource that keeps on giving. There's hardly a time in the year when there aren't fresh nettle tips for use in food and medicine, teas, that kind of thing. And it was also on the allotment early spring, when it's still cold and you're trying to get lettuce seedlings started. At some point I just stepped back and going, God, all around the edges of the bed is just this amazing rich, nutrient-rich food just growing there, and I'm concentrating on this little bit, and missing the bigger picture of just like, wow, there it is. I can just pick that, and I've got food, and it's done it all itself, and I haven't had to lift a finger, kind of thing. So yeah, there's that direct kind of visual strikingness of the plant, but the actual cloth and the yarn you get from it, it's sort of, it can go any range from green, it all over time sort of turns into a kind of natural linen color, sort of beigey color, but the feel of it's just really, it's odd. It's like in many ways it's like flax, but the actual quality of the cloth is sort of more like cotton. It's quite fluffy, and it doesn't have quite that sort of sheerness and stiffness that freshly spun and woven linen has. So yeah, it's familiar, but it's definitely got its own quality. And as I'm starting to get to the position to actually weave bigger pieces of cloth from it, it's I feel like I'm getting closer to its potential. And I mean, the other, on the path of learning about the history of our use of nettle, which around these parts is Urtica dioica, I've realized that there's actually in large parts of Nepal and India, in that part of the world, an extant tradition of using nettle, creating nettle cloth, which is used to make bags and baskets and jackets and knitted scarves. And so it's like, even though the tradition of the nettle in kind of Western European historical, you've got to dig a bit deeper. There are places in the world where it feels like there's an unbroken tradition of working with it, and that was very useful in sort of reapplying it back to our nettle.
In understanding your knowledge of agriculture, permaculture, and understanding this plant a little bit further as it relates to its necessity within our ecosystem as a weed, are you able to explain, or perhaps, do you have an understanding of what impact it has within soil and soil regeneration?
Yeah, I mean, that's an area that I'm sort of learning about and starting to extrapolate what this actually means. I mean, there's two really special things about nettle. Wherever it occurs, there's always seems to be a huge amount of insects depend on nettle, and sometimes solely on nettle, for laying the eggs and feeding caterpillars. So I think, so many of our British butterflies use, nettle is integral to their process. So it immediately makes you think, wow, so if nettle, even if it starts to be used in a more traditional agricultural sense of fields of nettle planted specifically for the fibre, that is starting to happen now. It's different from a lot of other crops in that it hosts insect life whilst it's growing, and it doesn't need very much in the way of additional nutrient added or insect. In fact, it works the other. It hosts insect life as it's growing, and the fibres are sort of the resource that you get after a lot of these cycles have already taken place, and the insects have got what they need from it. And I think there's definitely models. Nettles grow in quite nutrient-rich soil. Normally find them sort of at the base of hills where there's water runoff, so there's nutrient runoff from fields and stuff. So I think one idea that I've heard talked about is that nettles could be a sort of interim crop when you're converting quite heavily agricultural farmland back into meadowland or richer grass pasture, that you'd use the nettles to pull off those excess nutrients out of the soil to try to bring it back into balance. So there may well be models where nettles are used to kind of heal the soil and provide a useful resource at the same time, which I think is really, really exciting.
What I also think about when I think about the field of textiles, and I've felt this my entire career over the last 20 years, is that there needs to be a better balance. And obviously knowledge and education is a part of that. But at the same time, it's when you really have an understanding of it in relation to the bigger picture, exactly what you're describing. At least for me, I understand the importance of the accessibility of it. And when we have a better understanding of what is accessible in our own, local environments, we have a better understanding of not undervaluing those plants, those weeds that we often consider a nuisance. Everything inextricably has a value and a presence, I believe, for better, for worse, in the sense like there has been a lot of, misconception or disregard for certain resources, right? And so I'm curious though, for you, has there been anything about this fiber and resource as a whole that's surprised you in an unexpected way?
It's funny, it feels like there's sort of two avenues to what is coming into my awareness by working with the nettle. And the one's really personal, and I think it's an experience which is probably arises in a number of slow activities, be it processing plants, dyeing with plants, spinning, weaving, making clothes, just this very tangible relationship to the material that you're using, and it's like it forces you to slow down. So your whole relationship to cloth and clothes is kind of changed by the very act of doing it. And I think that, and that's something that I got from growing food on the allotment. It's like, realistically, it doesn't feed us all. It's a supplement to what we do. I still depend on the whole agricultural system at large to eat and survive. But my relationship with food is totally different as a result of growing, actual process of growing it and bringing that food home. It's like suddenly it's not this thing that just plops out of the sky onto shelves and supermarkets. It's like, I know what it takes and how to do it in such a way that all the worms and everything else that's part of the whole wider system, you kind of get that intimate feeling with. And that's what I think, like the Nettle for Textiles Group, I think that's a hit that a lot of people are getting. Just this real joy that you don't have to own land, have sheep, grow crops. You can just go out and forage. And even if you only end up making something very small, that intimate feeling that you've got of, wow, this is just growing there, I can use it, there's no wastage, there's very little input needed other than time, and just the sheer processing the material, it's like it just slows you right down. And I don't know, for me, it's I've heard it said, that's so cool that you managed to tame the nettle. And I go, no, the nettle totally tamed me. It's the other way around.
I love that.
Yeah, sort of forced the sort of whole slowing down and an intimacy with the material. So there's that very personal side of it. And then the other avenue is, a field which I'm no expertise in, I'm just hungry for knowledge, is how you can translate this out into making this kind of sustainable natural material viable to be used on a slightly larger scale, and at what point those models cease to be local and become too global, and you start to lose that connection between the material and the end product kind of thing. So just totally testing out those waters.
You just said something that really resonates with me, because I think in my understanding and knowledge of textiles, historically it's allowed for communities to be built and knowledge is to be shared, and it's really been about connection, and it's there's been so much disconnection as a result. I'm not going to just blame it on the Industrial Revolution, but so much change significantly, socially, politically, economically, and so on and so forth with trade, and more of the hand was removed from the process of making textiles. And I often refer to this in my own work, that when you remove the hand from the work, it creates a vacancy in that textile or in that material. But it's no different than when you remove an important ingredient from a recipe when you're making food, it's so integral. And I mean, I understand at times we need to improvise when there's a lack of something, but necessity is the mother of invention. When we're missing something, we do find new ways of creating and new knowledges and new systems for making and sharing knowledge around how we need to sort of reimagine traditional ways of making. But I also think...
No, I was just totally agreeing with you, Catherine. Carry on.
I'm curious because I've watched your videos and followed your work, and I think that in understanding that you spend so much time foraging and getting to know your local environment and understanding what's there and what's available to you, are there any other local resources that you're foraging, that you're using in collaboration with Nettle, or are you growing certain materials that you can use, such as dye resources, for example?
Yeah, I very much so. On the allotment, I now grow a few beds of flax every year, and I process that, and I find that really, linen and flax and nettle are so close that they blend very well, and they sort of lend slightly different qualities helpful in the actual production of the cloth, I find. So there's totally that. So, and also, the love dyeing, I really am loving that more and more with every passing year. So I grow dye plants on the allotment and in my garden at home. And that again seamlessly sort of fits into what feels right. Foraging, I collect dye, barks and acorns and beech nuts and tan and stuff. So
right, for your mordants and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly right. So I feel totally enmeshed in both the growing part and the foraging part, and they totally go together. And and I also just love being out in the countryside, just walking and looking around and learning what's around me, and selectively taking bits and pieces that I use, and it's that sense of place. I find that, I don't know, it's that sort of folklore, fairy tale kind of feeling to it all, where the land is providing the color and the fiber from which the cloth that you wear, so it's coming from the landscape, and it's helping you be in that landscape.
Well, do you think, no, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's just, I have this image of you immersed in this environment, and connecting it back to food for a second. There's so much emphasis around localism when it comes to experiencing like a local wine or some local cuisine, but there isn't enough emphasis on experiencing local textiles in that same context. And the way that you were describing your immersion in the environment and your relationship to the land in connection to your work and your practice, I get this sensibility that to create an experience through the textiles that you're producing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think obviously historically that's how it would have been. I mean, even though things have always been traded, I mean, even now there's types of textile that exist, and you just get the richness of that tradition of how different areas had different resources and specialized in creating both the fabric and the color of where they were, and that sort of diversity. And it was someone else that said it, but just the sense of, as soon as you like, if you make a bit of clothing or you weave a bit of cloth from stuff you've processed, you're attached to it, and on such a deeper level that you would want to mend it, you would want that to endure. But when it's bought cheaply in from a shop, it's like you just can't fill that void of the disconnect, and so you somehow just care less about it. It's just not as hard fought for. And it's the same with food. If I buy in some organic carrots from the supermarket and they go a bit mushy, it's like, oh well, it goes in the compost. But when I've grown it and carried it home in my rucksack and washed it and prepared it, it's like that's going to get eaten, every bit of it.
Yeah, right. Yes. But do you think through, like, when I was reading about you and some of my research, just in regards to the term, I think that you use, it's like the Sussex textile. Can you remind me? I didn't put it in my notes, so I apologize for that. But
yeah,
there's a terminology that you're using that I think really speaks to that experience.
I mean, I talk about the South Downs, like a South Downs tweed. It was just an idea of just trying to make something from the Sussex Downs. Has always traditionally has and still has a lot of sheep grazing on it. It's very much our now ancient landscape is very, very grazed. Yeah, and then dyeing that with dye plants that have been grown here. So it's that real localism to it, which subsequently I've found out about the fibre shed movement and realised this is actually a widespread idea, which seems to just caught the zeitgeist of how loads of people are feeling. And it's also made me realise, of course, it's just how difficult it is to do. I mean, unlike times before, each area doesn't have its own flax mill, its own spinning mill. It's just the nature of the modern world means things move around a lot more, so you're immediately struck by the limitations, and you go, I can't quite get that color that I like from stuff I got around here, so I'll get a bit of indigo in from wherever. So you're immediately forced into compromises, which I think is also good, because it stops one becoming overly idealistic and getting yourself knotted up. I mean, it definitely, all of this works better through a sense of enjoyment and playfulness and creativity. I just heard a snippet on the radio this morning, someone saying a manifesto to artists going, amaze us, don't preach to us. So yeah, I think I always try and bear that in mind, as I try not to get too preachy about it, because it's actually joyous, and like you said right at the outset, sort of limitations actually spur greater creativity. So at least with a vague ethos of I'd like to try and keep things as local as possible, it's a joyful, rich thing, and it connects you to people. people. I mean, even though the nettle journey has in one sense been very solitary, I've actually, through the process, I've met so many people locally. I love my spinning group that meets up and we do events, and the whole online Nettle for Textiles community. It's actually been really social and engaging, and it feels it's like all of this has spun out from, even though it's a very narrow remit at the beginning of just a curiosity, it's just all these tendrils and connections just seem to flow out of it, which I love.
And it just really speaks to sort of, coming back to something that you mentioned early on in our conversation, the power of seduction that this plant has, the mystery and collective excitement and curiosity for what can be done with this resource. And so that brings me to my next question is, are there any sort of other processes and methods that you'd like to explore and further expand and allow for your curiosity to continue in working with this fiber?
Yeah, I mean, so many. I mean, I think the other really exciting thing about nettles is this sense that it's even though it's an ancient fiber plant and has been used right the way down through antiquity, where we are now, it's like we're all beginners together. It's like this great excitement that if you spend a bit of time doing it, you're going to find ways that not only work for you but could improve everyone's practice. And just seeing people picking it up since the group got started, and obviously lots of people working way before me and independently of me, but just being able to share those insights and new ways of doing things, it feels like it's happening right now. We're relearning how to do this thing, and no one's an expert, and it's all there for the taking. And the sort of collegiate, collaborative way that Nettle for Textiles has sprung up has also been really heartening, where it's it's a folk resource. It's there for all of us.
And it's clear that your contribution is having an impact. And I know I referred earlier as well in our conversation that there are a series of videos, which I'm going to make those links available to the audience, because it really does walk you through your experience and how you navigate. You really break down process of working with nettle, and it's just so beautifully illustrated, and it allows for an accessibility around it. And I can see why your work is having an impact and a ripple effect, and why your Facebook group has, I think it's over 16,000 followers, and the fact that everybody is contributing to the conversation, and there isn't this sense of need of like one person having ownership over the information that's being shared, but it's building a material community, which is something that makes me beyond joyful to see, because in a world where textiles has a bad reputation, specifically in relation to overproduction and what impact it's had and it continues to have on our physical climate as a result of bad practices. From my perspective, the fact that you've been able to create this excitement and curiosity for this material and resource really speaks to how regenerative this is as a resource.
Yeah, totally spot on. I really like that regenerative idea. And also, I realize, and not just true of nettle, linen from flax, wool clothing, just the societal group, tribal sense that to dress everyone took everyone to be a part of that process. And especially with textiles, and I find with nettles, I do a lot of the actual drop spindle spinning of it whilst I'm out walking. And there's that sense of the place where I was walking that day, doing that bit of spinning, the people that I talked to, the connections, it all feels like it's going into the cloth. And my friend Dylan reminded me that I used the expression, it was like prehistoric photography or something, that somehow the sense of place is captured in the cloth, all the stories, the relationships of everyone involved in creating that cloth, which would then be used to clothe and protect someone. And it suddenly just, and going back into antiquity, especially with nettles, knowing how the time it would have taken. And it's almost like I can get a sense that, that had to be not a community that was surviving but thriving in order for that activity to actually take place. And also the sense of just in the past how our hands were always busy. You know, you would sit down, you would scrape nettle plants when you walked around, you would spin it, and you know, you can see it in paintings, in illustrations, people always having a distaff tucked into their belts. And it's like when you look at it externally, you go, God, it must have been hard having to do that all the time. But the actual benefits you get from doing that is, you know, it's this sort of like doing meditation type of thing. It's like, I don't know, it's so relaxing and simple, but really fulfilling. It's like you can't, it's really hard to actually be depressed when you've got something like that on the go. It's like it just chills you out doing it. So yeah, the actual process, the time it takes gives you something, rather than it's like something that's taking away from your time. And you know, I think it's almost like the way we've grown up to think about textiles where we're at now is like it's more convenient, it's freed up a lot of time, but it's actually taken away something very integral and tangible to us as beings, because for the most of the time we've been here, we've been doing this fibre work, basketry, mat making, beds. You know, it's like that's so deeply in our bones that you know, I find if I leave the house without a drop spindle on me, it's like leaving the cigarettes or something. It's like this nervous kind of like, man, what am I going to do with my fingers? It all starts to become a bit angsty. But yeah, and you know, it's the same with growing food. You just it's convenient and cheap to get it from the supermarket, but it's almost like you've been tricked out of the actual intrinsic joy that's there for you by doing it, you know, actively involved in doing it.
So poetically synthesized, and I can deeply relate to that embodied experience. And I've always believed in the work that I've done in my studio practice. It's so true. When you're working with your hands, you do allow yourself to exist in this meditative space, which often I find allows for you to answer a lot of your own questions around things.
Yeah.
And it just really gives to not just the experience of what you're doing, you know, it allows for you to be completely present with what you're working with. Aside from the insights that you develop, you know, it really does allow for you to process things, as you indicated, had our time freed up because of technologies, and we've filled it with all these other things that aren't necessarily allowing for us to maintain these deep connections that our ancestors have had to the land and to our materials. And ultimately, those things feed our creativity and our survival, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
totally agree, Catherine. Yeah.
My goodness, I'm sure we could talk hours about all of this, but for our audience, what do you want people to know about your work?
All I can say is it's just an exploration, and it's just totally guided by, I don't know, it's like you're saying, the next step in how I envision things is come about just through sitting there, scraping the nettles or spinning it, and actually with the material running through your fingers, it seems like the next step kind of materializes. Oh, I need to check that out and see how that works, or I wonder how it will work with that material. And then so it's totally an interactive exploration. I don't really have any clear view of where it's going or even much intentions. I just if I've got anything to share, it's just to share the joy of process, and the sort of finished results of things are in some ways secondary. They're almost like wow, it's actually become something, but all the nourishment came in the doing of it. And you know, I think everything I make, I kind of see in terms of like my allotment, like when this piece of cloth or clothing reached the end of its life, could I just use it as a mulch up the allotment, or it could just go back into the soil without and feed the next thing? That's that kind of closed loop system. And of course I understand in the complexity of the wider world, there's need for all sorts of specialist synthetic materials, and that's all good. But it's just, for me, the local aspect of it all means that the idea of bringing a plastic into that system has to be very considered, and how it dealt with has got that immediate impact. So my broad feeling of what feels right is the fibers and the materials have come from the plants, and then ultimately they can return back into the soil and help grow the next batch. So it's feeding my way into that cyclical nature of it all.
Well, it's about reciprocity, right?
Yeah.
I've always believed that about everything, but especially when it comes to textiles, because as you know, it is quite labor intensive. And I do want to address just how you are able to visually address that and illustrate that in the videos that you've produced so far. And with Dylan, your collaborator, you are currently sort of in the process of setting up your next project, and you have a Kickstarter to help support that. And it's under the title The Nettle Dress. So can you tell us more about this and how we can support this initiative?
Oh, well, yeah, thank you. I mean, I've really got to give credit to my friend Dylan, who's just such a great filmmaker. I mean, and the whole Nettle for Textiles thing just came about accidentally. Dylan had been working in the editing suite on a film called Into Thin Air, which is on Netflix at the moment. And he just wanted to get back out and get familiar with his camera again. And he knew that I was doing a bit of spinning. So he really just wanted to come round and just film me the spinning wheel just as an object, just to refresh himself with using the actual gear. And I was kind of like, man, Dill, while you're here, do you reckon I could just you could just film me showing the process? Because there's a couple of people that have asked me, and it's much easier to show it than it is to explain it.
I agree.
And so it was just like a little how-to video, nothing more than that. But after Dylan had edited it and put it together, it just became this other thing. It just became somehow much bigger than what the initial idea was. And that video just went viral and has had millions of views. And that set the ball in motion. So the sense of the film actually being the project coming up with the nettle dress, which was always what I envisioned right at the start of the journey, was to try and make something the most fairy tale thing that I could make, because the whole nettle journey and the story of the 11 brothers who get turned into swans, and she has to knit the nettle cloaks or shirts for her brothers to take them out of the enchantment and return them to their human form. That aspect of it, I thought, I've got to make something substantive at the end of all this, just to try and encapsulate the whole journey from fibre to finished cloth. But I realized that without the film there, it would just become something that hung in a wardrobe, and it really needed the film to tell the story. So in order to do it and actually create a half-hour film, which is sort of what the vision Dylan has for it, we've just done this Kickstarter, first time for both of us, just to try and raise the funds so we can make the best quality film we can with the best camera and the best post-production, just to capture the actual making of the dress and capture the landscape in which it's happened, and just let, like with the first film, just let the very simple story kind of tell a bigger story about our relationship to cloths and textiles. Yeah, so the idea of doing a Kickstarter to raise the funds to actually make this film and realize the making of the dress, I was a bit reluctant to ask for people to part with their hard-earned cash to support which was essentially just a crazy obsessive vision that I've had to create this garment from foraged nettles. But we agreed that it wasn't going to happen unless we could get some backing from somewhere. So we launched the Kickstarter for the first time for both Dylan and I. And it's really, I'm so glad we did, because it's been totally different experience to what I thought it would be. With all the people that have backed the project and sent such lovely and supportive messages, I really feel like it's become a collective endeavor now. And I feel like it's the whole project is riding on a whole group of shoulders rather than just our own. And I think we're just going to be able to make a really beautiful film stroke art piece and finish off the actual dress, which I hope will, through a very intimate story, tell a much bigger story on a lot of the things that we've talked about today.
And I think that's absolutely beautiful in regards to how the community is coming together to support you in a big way, and the fact that you are inviting the community to sort of be involved. And I think, that's what's going to allow for the success of this project. And whether you consider yourself a material activist in that sense, I think it allows for you to serve as an ambassador for this particular fiber and resource that hopefully will continue to motivate and have further impact within the community that exists and beyond.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So is there anyone that you think is doing innovative work using nettles that you've experienced in your observation of the community contributing things? Is there anybody that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I mean, there's people doing such interesting stuff. I mean, I have a friend, Sharon, who's based in Canada, and her
whereabouts? Is it on the West Coast?
I'm not exactly sure, to be honest. I'd have to check up from you. Canada is so vast.
It is. It's my home country.
Right. Okay. I mean, I have no idea. She mentioned that she was going to go and visit her mum. So whichever side she's on, her mum's on the other. And so she was talking about the train journey and how,
is this Sharon Callis?
Yeah.
I used to live in Vancouver for 20 years. So yeah, I know who she is. Yes. Yeah. Small world.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, totally small world. And she's cool nettle clothes at the moment. I mean, just really individual and just awesome. Well, you know of her. And again, I think she totally shares so much of the same ethos, but again, that she's articulated it so well, just this sense of connection to that piece of cloth, and how commercially bought in cloth, how it can feel so lifeless even though it's so beautifully constructed. Just something about that again, that personal, tangible connection to the material, and trying to work with the nature of that material to craft it into some original clothing. And I think that's just totally got the spirit of history, of how we have done that, just somehow used what's available and created just one-offs and very location specific solutions to how we clothe ourselves. So yeah, I really love what she's up to, and totally resonate with that. My friend Bridget, who I run Nettle for Textiles with, she's very much coming at the idea that nettle should be seen as a kind of couture, very upmarket fiber, even though it has this sort of humble origin. And she's showing it off in really beautifully woven tweeds, again coming from a very sustainable angle of using local sheep's wool and local dyeing and stuff. And
fantastic.
Her work's lovely. And really the amount of people making cool stuff on Nettle for Textiles, is just awesome, as well as all the Nepalese and Indian textile makers that use it and have been making incredible stuff for as far back as I can see. So yeah, there's a lot out there, and blending nettle with different fibers, wool and alpaca and all sorts. There's so much exciting stuff going on.
New developments. I love it.
Yeah.
So I guess this brings me to the point in the conversation where I ask each person that's a guest on the show to share a meaningful textile that they have. And this came about as a result of years of being a lecturer in textiles. And it was a great introductory tool. I used it for them to introduce themselves in a less vulnerable way.
Right, yeah.
And it was an amazing experience. There was a lot of unexpected friendships and relationships that developed as a result, but it just really allowed for people to connect in a much deeper way. Can you share with us what this textile is?
Yeah, what I shared with you was just one of the very first nettle cloth samples that I wove, and that piece of fabric, even though it's only small, it was just such a buzz to actually get a finished piece of cloth, because I was processing and building up the skills for 2 or 3 years before I actually ever saw a finished piece of cloth or a sample of cloth. And so it was just that realization that, it can be done, and it's a really awesome cloth. It just suddenly became it made it all worthwhile. But to be honest, when you asked for that piece of textile, that wasn't the one I was going to show. But it was just because I just didn't get it together to get a photograph of the piece I wanted to show you.
But you can tell me about it. That's fine.
Yeah, I can totally tell you about it. It was what's the word? A quilt. It was a sort of applique patchwork quilt that my mum made. And even though I only got into textiles quite recently, my mum has always sewn and made clothes and made beautiful quilts. And this particular one is just particularly special because I've had it for 25, 30 years, but it was the fabric that when my first son was born and the subsequent ones, that's what they were wrapped up in.
Oh, wonderful.
To be kept warm, or born at home. So that particular quilt just means a lot to me, because it's both been practically useful and served to keep the babies warm and decorated the bed, but also it was made by my mum. And that sewing textile connection, even though it didn't happen immediately, feels like it's finally jumped the generation, and I'm carrying on that tradition to some degree.
Wow. It's one of those things that sometimes you don't need the visual. And I'm kind of glad that you didn't rush to photograph it, because I just think you just painted this lovely, deep connection that you have. And I know that your sons will continue to have, whoever ends up with the quilt at some point. But I can just imagine it in its manifestation in its, colorful, patternistic way. So I really thank you for sharing that with me. That was really quite beautiful. I do have just one last thing. I know that your website is chock full of resources and content, and there is a nod to, some of your other collaborators on there. And yes, there's the Nettle for Textiles Facebook page that people should join. And if they are motivated to learn more or to become more involved in the world of nettles and creativity and using this resource, or just if they're playing curious, just to know more about it, what other ways can people find more about your work?
Probably the best way to find me, certainly on social media, is both my Facebook and Instagram accounts called Hedgerow Couture. And as I was saying earlier, it's very much a work in progress, but that's where I post pretty much everything, that whatever I'm working on, I'll post it up there, so you can see stuff that I've spun, woven, dyed. That's where it all ends up eventually.
Well, I strongly believe that anything that's meaningful is a work in process. So I thank you so much, Allan, for taking the time again to chat with me. What you're doing is truly inspiring, and it's clear that it's inspiring others as well. And I look forward to continuing to follow your journey and your story as a whole.
Oh, thanks so much, Catherine. I've really, really enjoyed our talk, and you've asked some really great questions, which I feel like I've been able to totally express what I hope to. So yeah, thank you. It's been great chatting with you.
Oh, that means so much to me. So thank you.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
I've really enjoyed it.
Until next time. Thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of The Material Revolution. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comments, or perhaps you may want to suggest a topic, material innovation, or an expert that you would like to hear on an upcoming episode, please reach out to us via email at info@thematerialrevolution.com, or you can contact us through any of our social media channels. If you haven't done so already and have enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe to the show via Apple Podcasts or from any platform that you're choosing to listen to this from. We would appreciate it if you could rate, review, and help us spread the word by sharing this podcast with friends. And if you would like to support this podcast further, consider visiting our Patreon page and make a pledge. You can do this by accessing the link that's located in the episode notes of this podcast, or you can visit our website or any of our social media channels where we will have that link made available. Well, that concludes our show for today. We hope that you left this episode feeling more curious about what can be done with textiles. Music for this podcast is provided by Interior Design, composed by Rob Mathrew. If you dig it and you want to hear more, please visit the link included in the show notes or visit our website for more information about his work. You can also find images from today's episode located on our website, www.thematerialrevolution.com, and other show highlights are available on our Instagram, Facebook page, and YouTube channel.